Hey guys, welcome back to Storytime with Mr. Isaiah. We are reading chapter 8, or starting chapter 7 today of Sink or Swim. And if you haven't been following along, make sure you go back. You can go back to the channel and watch chapters 1 through 6, and then you'll be caught up. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Be sure to let me know what you think of the story in the comments below. And with that said, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of chatter and just get right into chapter 7. 5 minutes later, Spinelli and I were past the grinder down by the lake with the rest of the company, lifting these heavy whaleboats over our shoulders. 13 of us to a boat and jogging with them down to the shore. I could barely keep my hands on our boat since the other guys were holding it pretty high, so I knew I wasn't carrying my share of the load. Once we were there, I jumped in and grabbed an oar, but Chief had other ideas. He went from boat to boat, tagging the smallest guy in each of the coxswain, the guy who sits in the stern and yells out directions to the rest of the crew, which of course are all the guys pulling on the oars. At first, I felt bad that I wasn't doing my part, but then, because I wasn't exercising and the other guys were, they heated up and I just sat there and froze. We spent the next freezing couple of hours rowing out into the lake under a full moon, keeping the shoreline in sight as best we could, though most of the boats did a lot of the zigging and zagging, and coxswains barking orders through their megaphones, but having a hard time getting everybody's strokes coordinated. One boat was stuck going in circles. Several slammed into one another, and a couple threatened to capsize, which would have been murder to anybody who fell in, even with your life jackets on. Somehow I managed to keep my crew working pretty much together and going in a straight line, or at least a straighter line than in the others. It also helped that I was so skinny and we didn't have any extra weight in our whaleboat. Strobe and Woody were on different boats. Spinelli was an oarsman on mine. He might not have been the soft, coming from Jersey and all, but he was sweating a river and grunting with each pull on the oar just like everybody else on the boat. Well, except for me. Then Chief announced that we were going to race. He was standing at the end of the dock with the bullhorn when he told us. Then he pointed east along the shoreline and barked, "Go." Our boat jumped quickly into the lead, and pretty soon we started pulling away. I kept up the orders, having one side pull harder if we veered off course one way, and the other side pull harder if we went too far in the opposite direction. I kept the pace of the rowing steady too. I'd been in enough rowboats to have some idea of what would work, even though I'd never done this coxswain thing before. My throat was raw from all the yelling, even with megaphone, and after a while I started sweating too, despite how cold and windy it was. The only problem was I didn't know where we were racing to, and when I finally turned back to look, I couldn't see any of the other boats. I had the crew slow down until the other boats came into sight, but they never did, so we just waited, the waves rocking us, the night wind whistling through and making everybody chilled now that we were all sweaty but no longer working and no longer generating any body heat. "We should have brought blankets," Spinelli grumbled. "Do you guys think we should turn back?" I asked, but nobody said anything. They were just like me, though I was pretty sure gone from thinking we were the best boat on the water to wondering if we'd gotten lost or hadn't heard an order or something bad. It turned out to be something bad, all right. When we returned to shore, Chief was furious at us for taking off the way we did and leaving the other boats behind. "But you told us it was a race," Spinelli said, before the rest of us could stop him. "We thought we were supposed to go fast and win." Chief turned red in the face and stepped over to confront Spinelli. "And what happens if one of the other boats capsizes?" he demanded. Who's going to rescue those sailors who are in the freezing water and drowning if you don't keep them in sight? The other loser boats that aren't back with us, them, Spinelli answered. Chief exploded. Wrong. Race or no race, you were responsible for your fellow sailors. No man left behind. Spinelli managed to keep his mouth shut after that. But the damage was done. Chief didn't make us do push-ups. He made us carry all the whaleboats and oars back up to the boathouse, and then clean and secure all the equipment while the rest of the company got to sit around a couple of fire pits and thaw themselves out and laugh at us. Then Chief ordered our crew to march over to the mess hall and peel potatoes. I apologized to the other guys, but they all said I shouldn't worry about it. It ain't your fault, Spinelli said. I scurried to keep up with the bigger guys, holding a whaleboat over their heads, so I'd at least be able to touch the side of the boat, even if I once again wasn't helping to actually carry it. Sometimes there just ain't no rules to follow, he continued, except the ones in Chief's head that he decided not to share with the rest of us. And that was how it went for the next 5 weeks at boot camp. More middle-of-the-night orders to move it, move it, move it, and not knowing where we were supposed to be, moving it to until we got there. More drilling on the grinder, more screams, more seamanship classes, more calisthenics, more marksmanship training and heavy weapons training, more swimming and life-saving and firefighting drills with protective suits and high-pressure water guns, and more hanging out with Strobe and Woody and Spinelli, sitting together at mess hall trying to get assignments together. We kept an eye out for one another and made sure we were nearby to help each other out of any jams. Sometimes, though, we all managed to get in trouble together. There was a mock ship inside an enormous warehouse they used to teach guys which way was forward and which way was aft, what was starboard and what was port, the difference between a forecastle and a pilot house, and a flying bridge and all the other parts of a ship. We got there early for the class, so the other guys and I started goofing around, pretending we were playing war on this pretend ship, making explosion noises and machine gun sounds, and just generally acting like little kids. But then the instructor showed up. At first, he just glared at us. Then he told us we were being idiots. And did we have any idea what could actually happen to us if we weren't vigilant when we were out on patrol? He rolled up his sleeve and showed us his arm, or what was left of his arm. It looked like red, raw hamburger meat. We could almost see the tendons underneath the thin flesh covering his elbow. He was missing 3 fingers. That's about a 3rd-degree burn, looks like, he said, after it's healed and after skin grafts and 4 surgeries. We all got really quiet. It's from not being vigilant, he said, his voice getting louder. It's from thinking this is all a big game and then all of a sudden there's an explosion and oil fire on your destroyer. So that's when you find out it's not a game. Not to you, and especially not to your best friend, whose whole body and face looks like this arm. He rolled his sleeve back down, and he stopped horsing around. They gave us aptitude tests to see which jobs we were best suited for in the Navy. And even though Chief had already promised me assignment to a subchaser, I had to take the test like everybody else because they needed to know what I would actually be doing on the subchaser. Most subchasers were this new class of smaller ships called patrol crafts that used underwater explosives like depth charges to damage or destroy U-boats. If they could catch them, which so far they hadn't had much luck doing. Patrol craft sounded like something you'd see terrorists on for sightseeing around or Outer Banks in the summers before the war anyway. Strobe said he wanted to shoot big guns and he didn't care what kind of boat he did it on. Spinelli said he'd take a desk job, which surprised me since he was always talking about how tough everybody from Jersey was and everything. Woody said maybe he'd like to work on engines. The Navy took down the information but didn't make any promises. On Sundays, Chief made us all go to church, which was nice because it was the one time during the whole week when we got to just sit and do nothing. About the only rule Chief had for us in church was that we had to stay awake, which wasn't a problem for me with all the praying I was doing. But it was hard for a lot of the guys because of how tired we were and how hot it got in there with so many of us crammed together in the pews. Anybody Chief saw nodding off, he made swab the barracks deck in the afternoon instead of playing football on the grinder or seeing visitors at the reception building. I prayed for Danny to get better and come out of his coma and not have anything too terrible wrong with him. I prayed for Mama to not be worried about me. I prayed for Dad, who I still missed even though he passed away 4 years ago. That was usually when I got homesick, when I was praying for all of them and thinking so much about home and remembering that just a few weeks before I was like anybody else who was 12, studying the Revolutionary War, doing sums, diagramming sentences, and playing ball. Now that seems so far away and long ago that it was like it had all happened to a different person. After church was visiting hours, and guys who had family close by enough got to see their moms and dads and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins hauling in baskets and buckets of coolers full of food that ended up getting shared with the rest of us afterward. But while the visitors were there, those of us without any family just made do the best we could, since everybody felt some kind of lonely during that time. We played checkers a lot, and cards. Spinelli tried to teach us chess, but Woody couldn't follow it to save his life, and Strobe thought it was stupid that the queen had all the power, but the king couldn't do much of anything except move one space at a time until he got killed. I don't see why he can't move however he wants, and as far as he wants, and jump over anybody he wants, Strobe said. I mean, he's the king. All right. Spinelli finally just gave up. When we got tired of games, we caught up our newspaper reading, which was something I'd never done much of in my whole life. But I thought it would make me look older if I took it up now. But the news just made me so mad. How long it was taking the United States, us, to send troops over to Europe to actually fight the Germans instead of just sending supplies to Great Britain and the USSR. I mean, it was important too, but when were we going to go to real war with the Nazis? And those poor merchant marines running supplies across the Atlantic were getting sunk by the hundreds by U-boats and Nazi warships and Luftwaffe planes, not to mention the eastern seaboard of the U.S., where more and more cargo ships and passenger ships were being targeted by the U-boats to disrupt the supply lines back here at home too. I'd read about all that, and a few times without realizing what I was doing, I'd torn the newspaper in half, and then ripped it into smaller pieces until Strobe stopped me. "Easy, little buddy," he said. "There's others who also want to read that." I couldn't help it, though. I was always thinking about what happened to Danny and me on that day when Danny was in a coma. It all just made me so mad I could spit. So that was when my friend stepped in and dragged me away to play ping pong, or shoot pool, or deal up some other card game. Anything to take my mind off Danny. Not that I'd told them what happened, but somehow they just seemed to know. On payday, I cashed my check at the bank on base. I was tempted to buy some clothes since I didn't have any except my uniforms, but decided to send it all to Mama, the way I'd promised myself I would. except for keeping enough to buy myself a candy bar, but that was all. I wrapped the bills up good and tight and got a big envelope at the post office to mail it to Oak Brook Island, with a letter to Mama also tucked inside. Dear Mama, I've been working like I told you, but not in Morehead City. I can't tell you where, but I don't want you to worry. Everything is good. I have made some friends, and we are always very busy, and I've been staying out of trouble. Every Sunday I go to church, and I pray for you all. I wanted to tell her everything that had happened since I left home. It didn't feel right to keep so much a secret from her. All my life, Mama had always known what I was up to. Living on an island, everybody knew everybody, and you couldn't get away with anything without somebody telling your parents. But I wasn't on that island anymore, so I made it a short letter and promised to write her again soon and send more money when I got my next paycheck, and signed it, Love, Colton. Alright guys, that's the end of chapter 7. Looks like we're going to be picking up with chapter 8 next. Make sure that you're following along, and if you've missed any of their stories, you can always go back on the YouTube. You can find me under Mr. Isaiah. You can see the spelling just by looking at the bottom of this one. I don't know just how the videos are posted on YouTube, but they all have a title. So part 1, part 2, part 3, or chapter 1, 2, and 3, that's your chapters, so it's easy to find out where you're at. Don't forget to leave a comment in the comments below, and I hope you're enjoying the story. Stay healthy, whole, and I love you so much. And goodbye.